the BNLF, that which is the British Nigeria Law Forum Domestic Abuse Seminar. This is an event I organized firstly because it coincides with the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and really it's in an effort to educate lawyers, social workers, police officers, and all those professionals who are involved in the justice system about how we can better serve our community for people who experience domestic abuse. So that's really the purpose of tonight's event.
Hello, my name is Richard Alamo. I am a member of No5 Chambers, which has kindly agreed to host this particular seminar put together by the British Nigeria Law Forum on domestic violence. It's been a pleasure hosting this seminar, and it's been very informative and educative as well.
We do have cases where a defendant might have been found not guilty at trial in the criminal court, but then in effect you're having another trial again in the family court because the court has to be satisfied about the risk of harm to the respondent mother and to the children. Now, David was talking about special measures and the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act, which prevents the applicant directly cross-examining the mother. Now, that legislation applies in the criminal court, and it enables the defendant to access a lawyer. So he has a lawyer representing him at the criminal trial where he doesn't have legal aid. Unfortunately, in the family court, that provision is not available. That's one of the issues that would have been addressed in the domestic abuse bill.
So my name's David Smillie. I've been practicing, or I've been in law with 31 years, and tonight we're talking about domestic abuse. Domestic abuse which affects all communities, regardless of age, sexuality, where you're coming from, where you're going to. It knows no boundaries. And tonight I was talking about the court proceedings, trials, sentencing, and the assistance available at court for victims of crime.
And are very critical of the family court because they feel that the courts are making orders in favor of violent fathers. But it's a very kind of difficult balance, because on the one hand the law says that the children have a right to have a relationship with both parents as long as it is safe, and the Human Rights Convention Article 8 also grants that right to family life. But you have to balance it on the evidence that is available to the court. Then they could make an activity direction, that is, ask CAFCAS to refer the applicant to a program. Usually it's a domestic abuse perpetrators program, and that is a program that is held weekly, and it lasts up to 6 months. It's similar to the Building Better Relationships that David spoke about. And CAFCAS refers the applicant to a course provider. I think there are some private course providers paid for by CAFCAS. And there's an assessment. The assessment takes about 6 to 8 weeks. Now the applicant has to admit, he might have denied that he was a perpetrator and he's been found to be so by the court. But if he doesn't show remorse or doesn't admit that he has been a perpetrator, he would be found not suitable for the DAPP. And if that is the case, if he's not suitable for DAPP, then his options in terms of having contact with the children are really minimal, because he's still deemed to be a risk to the respondent and the children. And sometimes Kafka has identified some fathers who they say have disguised compliance. So they answer all the questions. They haven't changed their behavior, and they are still regarded as a risk to their partners. And I know the women's groups, a number of women's groups have been campaigning and are very critical of the family court, because they feel that the courts are making orders in favor of violent fathers. But it's a very kind of difficult balance, because on the one hand the law says that the children have a right to have a relationship with both parents as long as it is safe, and the Human Rights Convention Article 8 also grants that right to family life. But you have to balance it on the evidence that is available to the court.
Well, hello, Dr. Bode Adesida. I've come to the British Nigeria Law Firm Forum today to talk about domestic abuse. As we all know, it's this universal phenomenon that causes sort of like trauma to our families, not just the victims, the children in those families, and the impact on society as a whole. In a way, we need to find ways to raise the awareness of the community to help sort of like prevent this happening. Having to treat people in a way can be very, very challenging, because we have not been able to stop it in the first place. We need to know why people cause all this violence. We need to know why the victims continue to stay in these relationships that are not going anywhere. We need to help the society, and I'm glad I've been able to contribute to that. I tend to have two stories that come to mind. One was probably about 15 years ago. At that time, I had my father staying with me for a period of 2 months. And on one day, I overheard this conversation, and I only had 2 words: police and ostracized. So when he came off the phone, I asked him, what was that about? And he said, well, a friend of his son had just been sort of like kicked out of the family home by the wife. He's of the view that the wife wanted the house and has reported him for domestic violence. So they've called him to ask for his advice as to what to do. And he said that, well, from his point of view, we have to ostracize the woman, because what she's doing is wrong against the culture. The second story that comes to mind was when I was still in my teens, and my mother used to drag us to church, and I was sort of like listening to this pastor preach. And what he said on this particular day actually caught my attention. It's about a woman who had been sort of like been beaten up by her husband virtually nearly every day. So she goes to what we Yorubas call Babalawo, like a witch doctor or diviner who is able to help you with the problem. What she really wanted was to be able to control her husband. And the man and the witch doctor gave her this white thing with something black in it. And he said to her, the only thing you have to do is that when you get home, put it between your teeth. Whenever your husband starts to hit you, bite on it. The more he beats you, the more you should bite on this thing I have given you. She did that. Within the first week, he stopped beating her. The second week, he started coming home on time, tried to help her with the dishes, tried to bring her flowers. By the third week, he was saying, oh, darling, we have to go out to the restaurant. And he was also saying that, am I giving you enough money for the upkeep? So she goes back to the Babalawa and says, what's happening? And he says, well, I haven't given you any juju as we call it. What I have done is that I have taken cotton wool and put charcoal in it. And I just sort of see that you are a woman who, when your husband talks to you, you talk back at him. So when you were biting on the cotton wool and charcoal, you were not able to say anything. You see how women have to even take the blame for the violence. As David and Babs have said, domestic abuse is a worldwide phenomenon. It affects all racial, national, social, and economic groups. And one of the things I was trying to do was to count how many women are in the room. And I was thinking, oh my God, I don't like saying this, but does it mean that about 3 or 4 women here are being abused? That's just based on statistics. And that's some of the things we have to take in mind. And in a way, you don't just need to think about the violence perpetrated by the perpetrator, because in a way, it's not just the violence. It's the fact that we are living with someone who might be violent. And in a way, even those times when they are not violent, we are thinking about it. But then it's also their parenting style. People who are bachelors are said to either not be involved with their children, they can be violent to their children, or they might even undermine the parenting of their partner. What tends to happen is that there is a cycle of violence where the tension is building up, maybe there's name calling, abusing, disagreements, and then it becomes sort of like violence. And then after that, things seem to settle down. That is why some perpetrators go out and buy flowers for their wives, and the wife says, oh, he loves me, he brought me some flowers. There's also a way of thinking about domestic abuse by linking it to what we'll call the power and control wheel. Although it's also been criticized. This is where it's felt to be linked to patriarchy in a sense, where there's sort of like power and control in a relationship. And the perpetrator, usually the male, will intimidate, emotionally abuse, isolate, and all these things that fail to contribute to the physical and sexual violence afterwards. It seems some cultures tend to sort of like support this, maybe because of patriarchy, and it's felt to be the natural order of things. I mean, just like Adam and Eve. Eve was from a rib of one of Adam's ribs. So in a way, people tend to see males as being sort of like superior to the female, and that might be one of the issues, that the perpetrator feels entitled to what he has done, and he feels that the use of force is okay. It's been criticized though, in the sense that people say patriarchy doesn't in itself cause family violence. If patriarchy did, there'd be more violence than there are. There's also female-initiated violence as well. And there's also this question about, most studies tend to be on people who are in violent relationships. Maybe in a way we also need to study situations where there's no violence as well, and maybe we'll be able to sort of like have more data to go on.
Typically, we're a specialist service, so we do focus on the experiences of minoritized women. So this is including Black, minoritized women, and refugee women as well. What would you guess it would be? A, B, or C? Yeah, exactly. So whilst the statistics for women in general, including white women, are 5 to 12 contacts, for BME women experience even harder time in reaching these services. BME women experience higher rates of domestic homicide and are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than other women in the UK. Now that's a real big problem, and we have to look at the political climate that we're in order to contextualize this. So why is it that Black women are dying through domestic abuse way more than any other types of women? And we'll get onto that later. The London Black Women's Project actually runs on an intersectional Black feminist framework. So that includes not only just looking at women's equality, but looking at this specific positionality of black women. So their race, their class, their ethnic backgrounds, their nationalities, what types of passport they hold. If they're migrant women or women who are born here, these all things play a picture as to how they eventually are treated in the society that we're in. That they could face potential homelessness and deportation if they do not receive the adequate support, if they're going through domestic abuse. Having said all of this, which I would like to say is pessimistic, but in reality this is just what happens, we will go through the measures that we accessed in order to support the women that we come across out of the local authority. So essentially, in Section 17 of the Children's Act 1989, which imposes a general duty on local authorities to safeguard and promote the welfare of children in need. And why I bring this up, it's connected in some sort of way, is that if you do have a woman who has experienced abuse and needs to leave and also needs to go to her counsel like I'd mentioned before, and if they're refusing her support, she can actually ask for support under Section 17. And this is now based on her child, so that the council has a duty of care to keep her child safe, which also includes, like Babs talked about earlier, Article 8, which their child deserves a right to family life. So therefore, by implication, you also have to house the mother with the child.
Whether you have anxiety or you have depression or you have a psychosis, all these risk factors, domestic abuse and poverty, they don't really get dealt with anymore or even get assessed. And in a way, we also think about, we need to go back to the basics, which is you will have a population there. And that's where, I mean, a lot of women attend those sort of like services. And that's one way of trying to sort of like engage and get the public education going.
Very well aware of the issues facing a lot of women, families and especially black people, in accessing the kind of services that are supposed to be provided. But due to cuts, there are limited resources there to actually cope with all the stuff that, all the services that are needed.
Like that, my firm does go as high as they can, whether it's obtaining an injunction to try and secure accommodation for the individual as if there is merit in the application. In situations like the lady from the organisation has mentioned, where a mother might go to the local authority, be refused housing assistance maybe because they're undocumented, maybe the child is then put forward for an assessment under Section 17. We have incidents where the local authority may say, okay, we'll accommodate the child, but we won't accommodate you. And therefore you then have to seek that the separation of the family is unreasonable, and it may have to go to the High Court on an emergency basis. So therefore it's about really if the mum is able to access competent legal advice at that crucial time. And sadly, when people do go to their national embassies as a last resort, and this is after they've tried to find legal advice, maybe their lawyer's going to an out-of-hours judge and they're stranded on the streets of London and been to hospitals, out of hospital, then where do you go? Not on the night bus, to your embassy. And it depends on who's on your front line. It depends on how equipped your embassy is with a welfare department, welfare teams, and again, who is, as well as that, advising the embassy as to what that individual's rights are in that country, especially if they're not documented.
The last speaker, one or two questions. The first one is, roughly how many women do you see in your centre on a monthly basis? Just to give me a rough idea of the numbers, really.
About 60.
Okay, about 60. And I noticed that I think you have about 5 centres in London. Where do those cover?
East.
Yeah,
Yeah.
northeast.
Northeast.
Yeah. Are there any centres out of London, say like Manchester,
I know that
Birmingham, do you think?
in Newcastle there is a BME specialist service called the Andrew Centre. We actually have a partnership with one of them as we're working on a sexual harassment project with them. But they are the only ones that I've engaged with, yeah.
I also found that a lot of the women are women just like us. Women just like us, professional women who, because of shame and embarrassment, don't talk about it. And you're right, at the GP right now, when you go to your GP, you might say, you know, you can't sleep or something, and they'll give you something for anxiety or depression, but they're not going to look at, you know, the potential surrounding issues, right? Domestic abuse. They do, it's called Domestic Violence in Churches Too. I talked to my church about it. They wasted time. I knew I needed to go because of the work that I do. So I went, and it was really quite saddening that we were about 30 people that were representing different churches, and I was the only black person. And we were all church people. We were all, and it was the only black, and this is something that's available. It's very cheap. A church can sponsor 5 people to go. The second thing I want to say on top of that is, you know, churches are not equipped to deal with these things, but your pastor or your imam or somebody will pray for you and send you back, and so you go back to be, you know, re-victimized. So there are lots of things there. And another comment I wanted to ask to this lovely lady, we spoke last week. Yeah, I did give you a call. Yeah, is you said that in your contact details, you said that if someone needs to call, they need to call the domestic violence helpline. And I'm wondering, when you call, do you have to tell them what your, you know, your ethnicity is? How will they know to refer you to one of your 5 or 6 refuges?
Domestic helpline does is it looks at the refuges across the country that have spaces. So it's not necessarily that you need to go through them to reach us, but if we have a space, it will be on. There's an online system that all like refuges use called Routes to Support that they have the database for. But in the questioning, yeah, they do ask, like, where are you from? And obviously that's if you want to disclose it. Do you want to be part of, do you want to go to a specialist refuge? So that's an option that's given.
Done through a cinnamon organised.
Yeah.
So we're kind of working on it. I've been going to churches for more than 10 years doing domestic violence talks. But as a collective, going into the religious organisations, some imams even call us in. So there is that connection, but a lot of women again don't reach out. A lot of men stay even quieter. So we've got to remember there are men that in the small numbers, but many
Absolutely.
due to immigration issues in really awful situations, and others due to economic situations subject to abuse. But yes, we know women are suffering in the larger numbers.
Sort of like funded for these assessments. People are no longer thinking it's things they can do. I mean, I do assessments, it takes me over 40, 50 hours, and I only charge 20 hours. And now they are telling me to reduce how much I charge, and the courts are now telling you how much you spend on an assessment. If it's a child, you can only spend, I think it's 25 hours. If it's 2 children, it goes up to 35 hours. The court is deciding for you. And then you have to decide, do I really want to do this assessment? So those things affect those assessments.
Neutral and being impartial. I think because now we have a single joint expert and everyone actually has to instruct that expert, and we all have the opportunity to put forward our own different names before one is chosen. That in itself helps. And also we all have to contribute to pay for that expert. And so it's not necessarily just a local authority. Having sufficient experts from a minority background, like Dr. Adesida here, you used to do this many years back, and I said to you, all of a sudden I don't see you again. And well, thank God, I hope you come back again, because we need guys like you to, who actually can see it from, the perspective of the minorities and where they come from, and then can give expertise and give opinions from that angle. We do really need them, and there is a dearth of them in family law at present.
It's kind of almost too late.
It must come from society within, because it's similar to like smoking, where adults who smoke will go outside the house to smoke rather than smoke in front of the young children, because they're getting educated. So it's a slow process, but bit by bit it will eventually get better. It might be 10 years, might be 15 years, but eventually it will become, instead of being the norm, people will be like disgusted if their uncle or their stepdad or whatever behaves like that. And I think eventually it is education. similar to like smoking, similar to drinking, similar to like wearing your seatbelt in your car, or drink driving, where 20 years ago people would go to a pub, have a drink and think nothing of driving home, where now it's socially unacceptable. If you're out with your friends and somebody's driving, they leave the keys behind the bar and they take a taxi home. So I think it will get there, but it is very slow.
It's eating. How can you then say it doesn't happen? And in a way, it's getting out there. That's the work that needs to be done. I mean, I agree with you. Treating might not even sort of like bring about what we want. It is the change that needs to happen. I always liken it to infection. We talk about how if someone has an infection, you give them antibiotics, and that helps to cure things. But the reality is that if you take care of your sewage, if you provide people with clean water, it makes it easy to manage infection if we wash our hands. But we have to get out there. And I think this forum that has been organized by the British Nigerian Law Forum would help. But we need to do more of this kind of things to get out there to help people.
Contemporary Nigeria, because I know like you speak about the older generation, but I think the book actually kind of encapsulates where the kind of attitudes are in with the younger generation, and why there is still a need for change. And I think this time with social media and so forth, we can put a lot out there. But on that note, if I may call my chair, to just say a few words.
The Family Law Network was set up to organise, and you've responded really well by coming here. I know you're very, very busy, and I think we've really touched on some really important topics this evening. Babs has summarised it really, really well, and David, you kind of kicked it off really well by informing us about the DV and the protection orders and all, a lot of things that some of us weren't quite aware of. And thank you for bringing us up to date as to what's been happening. I think it's really, really useful. Ivie, thank you very much. I was really impressed with what you spoke about, and it's just a shame that funding is so little, and if there's anything we as an organisation can do, we really will be tapping in on you and your organisation. Dr. Adesida, thank you very much for filling us in, and especially on the cultural side of things. I think it's really important that experts of your experience continue to work in the family courts and bring your expertise to the fore, because it's really important that in the legal system that your work is continues and is brought out there, and judges have a really proper understanding of some of the cultural elements, because it's not just the law, it's also some of the cultural and psychological elements that it's really important to know, and you explain that really, really well. So thank you very much.
I want to say a big thank you to our hosts, number 5 Chambers. This is the second time that they've kindly accommodated us. So please avail yourself of the food and wine there. And just to say a big thanks to one of the members here, Richard, who's trying to avoid my eyes sitting there. Thank you very much, Richard, for hosting us.